Hello guys, my name is Nate, welcome back to my channel. I have today my December reading wrap up. It's late, it's almost the middle of January as I'm filming this, but it is also going to be the shortest reading wrap up that I've probably ever filmed. I read 4 books in the month of December. I did read a couple of manga that I was finishing off from November, but I'm going to include them in a wrap up that I'm going to do for that month. So yeah, let's just get into what I read in December. Starting off with Yotsuba Volume 2. This is the continuation of the Yotsuba series and it's really enjoyable. I really don't have much to say about this series. It's an extremely light-hearted, slice of life, funny, kind of silly series. I think it's rated like all ages, and yeah, it's just quite good fun. Here's like a little look at the art, and yeah, just kind of silly everyday adventures that our young character Yotsuba goes on in this new town she lives in with her neighbors that are friends with, and yeah, it's really light-hearted and I'm really enjoying it, so I have every intention of continuing the series. And yeah, that's the only manga that I really read. Other than the other manga that I read that are from November, that's the only manga that I read. And then I read 3 books. So starting with Jane Eyre, I listened to this on audiobook. This is the story of Jane. At the beginning of our series, she is living with her uncle's wife, so her aunt by marriage, as a orphan. Her parents are both dead and her uncle is also dead. So she lives with her aunt and her cousins, who are all quite mean to her. And at the age of 10, she is basically sent away to live in this kind of boarding school. And you have a bit about the boarding school where she quite thrives in, like she gets on really well there. She ends up growing up and kind of becoming a teacher there, and then she decides to move on from that and finds work as a governess in this house of Rochester. That's his name, isn't it? That's not his first name. I think his last name's Rochester. The Rochester house, where then she begins looking after a ward of Mr. Rochester, and a romance slowly develops between the two. That's kind of the basics of the story. I'd known a little bit about there's a plot twist or like a mystery or something that goes on in this book, and I did know a bit about it because I had seen some kind of BBC adaptation or something when I was younger. So I wasn't surprised by that reveal because I knew in the back of my head that it was coming. But I actually quite enjoyed this book. It's a long book. It's like 400 pages. I did listen to it. The audiobook actually was narrated by Tandy Newton, and she did a very good job of the narration. This was the first kind of classic that I've read from this time that wasn't really a romance. Most of the classics I've read have either been in early 1900s classics or Jane Austen romance books. So I haven't really read anything that was, I think this was in the 1800s, and it's kind of, it has a romance in it. The romance is definitely a subplot, and it has this more lifestyle journey that goes through, our main character Jane goes through, and I thought that was a really nice story. I will say as well, is in comparison, I guess, to Jane Austen, this has a lot more like touching on religion a lot more. There is mentions of religion in Jane Austen's books, but not hugely. But there is a lot of mention of religion in this, which I thought was interesting to kind of see from a perspective of living in like 21st century England to what religion was kind of looked at, and the response to it was in like the 18th century, 17th century, 18th century, 18th century. 19th century England, how that would have been. There was a bit at the end with something which I won't go too much in detail because it is a bit of a spoiler, but where I think the religious aspect was kind of tried to weaponize against Jane. There was a character that wanted her to do something that she didn't want to do for personal reasons, and he was kind of like, he didn't explicitly say, fine, burn in hell then. But that's kind of the vibes it gave. It was like, you're going against what I think as a religious man, I think also a man of religion, like he worked in religious places. And really what I'm asking of you is like God's design, and you rejecting that, it goes against God. It's kind of the, like how it was like acted out, how it was acted. And I hated that. Like, I'm really glad Jane didn't go for that. And I actually quite liked how this book ended up in terms of Jane, where her story ended, because I was like, no, don't try and use that against her. Like, he was just being really horrible to her about it, and I just didn't like that. So I'm quite glad that did not go that way. There was also a bit in this book where, with another character, I'm going to be quite vague about this, wanted Jane to do something, and he was like, well, why do you care? Because you don't have any family, you don't have any friends, so no one's going to look at you lesser from doing this just because, you know, you don't have anyone that will think of you, so why do you care? And she was like, well, because I love myself, and so I don't want to do this because I will view myself less. And I really liked that. It was kind of like her being like, I'm not doing it because it goes against who I am as a character. And so I really liked that. I think Jane was an interesting character in that, again, I'm talking about Jane Austen stuff here, but that's the kind of the only kind of comparison I can really have, although they're very different genres. But like, they are all wealthy women where Jane is not. Jane has to work. Jane is, you know, she goes to a boarding school. She's kind of treated like crap at the beginning. And I will say, I think it builds up Jane as a character really nicely. I think about the first 100 pages are just her childhood and growing up. And then you don't really even meet Mr. Rochester until about, I think, 150 pages in, or at least definitely over the 100-page mark. So like, I think it's been a while, but like, it takes some time to really build Jane as an individual character before adding in this element of Mr. Rochester and Jane learning her feelings. There is a bit of, obviously, I guess, could be contemptedness over Jane's relationship with Mr. Rochester, because he, first of all, is her employer. He's also much wealthier than her, so there's obviously that. And he's also much older than her. I think he's a good 15 years. I think she's 18 in this, and I think he's either in his mid-30s or late 30s. I can't remember, it's been a while. But yeah, so there's like a bit of that, but also I think because of the time it's set in, this for Jane is like better prospects than she potentially would ever get. But yeah, and honestly, I really enjoyed this book. So yeah, this was a good read. I think I ended up giving this, I don't remember the rating I gave this. It was either a 3.5 or a 4-star. I will be honest, my rating system doesn't really amount to anything, if we're honest. I mostly rate things on how I'm feeling right after reading them. And so when I'm a bit removed from them, that could be different. But that's the way I like to rate them, so that I can look back and think about how much I liked it or how much I didn't right after the fact. So I can't remember with this, but I had a good time reading this, and I really enjoyed Tandy Newton's narration for this. The second book I read, also by a Bronte sister, was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This one I did not like as much. I definitely didn't like this as much as Jane Eyre. I didn't hate this one. Going into this, I was very much under the impression it was a romance story, and that is absolutely not what I got. This is the story of, well, I'll tell you what the story is actually of. This is the story of a guy that goes to the Wuthering Heights area. The Wuthering Heights is actually a place, but I can't remember what the area is. It's New York, I think. It's up north. But he goes there and rents a house that is owned by Heathcliff. He rents the house from Heathcliff, and he's like meets Heathcliff, and he's kind of confused about who this guy is. He goes to Heathcliff's house. He sees this young girl called Kathy and like this weird family, not weird family, but this like family that live there, and he's intrigued. So he asks his housemaid, or the person that looks after his house, about the story. And then she tells him the story of Heathcliff growing up with this young girl called Kathy in this family that he's adopted into, and the story. The story is a retelling from a third party of this romance between Kathy and Heathcliff, and then goes on throughout later on generations, also talking about their children. Yeah, I would not say this was a romance. I got more impressions of feeling from our main woman narrator, whose name I can't remember. I can't remember her name, but I felt more for her, and she kind of developed a kind of maternal bond with Kathy's older brother's son, so Kathy's nephew, who was Heathcliff's adopted ward. And I felt more of like that relationship from a very small snippet than I ever really did Kathy and Heathcliff's relationship, because you don't get any of their feelings and emotions from them. Because as a character, she can only tell stuff of the instances of what she witnessed herself. She cannot obviously give you privy to what they were actually feeling or intimate moments they shared, because she wasn't there for them. And so that left this romance feeling extremely lackluster, to the point where when big events happened in the book, I didn't feel anything for either of these characters. Heathcliff is actually just quite a nasty character, and the treatment he then leads onto these younger children, his own child as well, later on in the story, was just awful. And yeah, this was just a bit naff for me in terms of that. I don't know if I think I went into it with a different mindset, I might have enjoyed it more, but because I just didn't like really much of our main characters, well, I liked our main narrator, I thought she was really nicely. I can't remember her name, but I really did like her. I thought she seemed really nice. But like the whole thing was of Heathcliff, just kind of, also, I kind of felt like he didn't really, not that he didn't get just deserves, but he kind of didn't face much consequences. He ended up getting everything he kind of wanted, to a point really where he could, I suppose, because there was a point where he could not get what he wanted because it had been like taken away from him, like past the point of reason, I guess. But yeah, I just feel like there wasn't any point where he really got his comeuppance from like the later timeline. And then at the end, I'm not going to spoiler it, but at the end, it goes back and to the perspective of this guy, this random guy who is in no way connected to anything in this area. He leaves, has a think about everything that's going on up there, and it's like, maybe I can try and, make things better. Comes back and everything's just fixed. Like, I won't say how it's fixed, but everything's just better. So, and that's how it ends. And so I just thought that was a bit pants, to be honest. I definitely preferred Jane Eyre to Wuthering Heights. I'm only comparing them because they're done in the same timeline by sisters, and they do both have that kind of gothic vibe, which I do think I get in terms of they were both just a bit more somber and just a bit more disheartening. So yeah, this wasn't that great for me. I did again listen to this, and that made it much easier, and I listened to it in a day actually, because I had a challenge to do that. And yeah, and I took it all in. I think, obviously I don't remember this, I think her name was Louise. Anyway, I did take it all in, and I did really enjoy my time with it, like actually deciding to do that for a book and being like, I'm just going to listen to the whole thing in one day and see if I can, and I did. So I was quite happy with that. So it was fine. It was just, I think maybe in a couple of years I will read it again, and going in with a better understanding and a better expectation of what it's going to be will probably give me maybe a different result, but I shall see. And then I had 3 Christmas books that I wanted to read this year, and I read 1.5. I ended up not finishing the second one. I will at some point, but I just haven't now, which is fine though, because despite its name, Christmas at the Palace, it has all to do with Christmas so far, and I'm over halfway through. So I'm very annoyed at how misleading that title is, but I'll talk about that when I actually do finish that book. The Christmas Christmas book I did finish was Dying for Christmas. This is by Tammy Cohen, and this was a book that me and my sisters were reading as a Christmas book club we were doing together. This book was wild. We all kind of had very similar opinions of this book, but I think I rated this book a 2-star. The writing itself wasn't the best in terms of just how it was written. Our author loved a metaphor. Like, there were so many metaphors used in this and some of them were so cringe. Let me give you the basics of what this story is. So the idea of this story is about a girl on Christmas Eve. She is Christmas shopping. She meets this guy at a cafe. She's a bit depressed with her life. She's in a bit of a lackluster romance. And so she decides to go with him back to his place, and he ends up kidnapping her. And he's going to keep her entrapped for the 12 days of Christmas, giving her a gift each day until she ultimately believes it will become her murder. So when they first meet, he has a dimple. And the dimple was mentioned a lot. And there was an odd dimple analogy at the beginning, which I can't remember 100%. Let me see if I can get it to, because I think it was on like the first page or something. He smiled, and the dimple in his cheek was like a cave inviting me in, which I was like, okay. This was the quote that really got me. The artist's smile remained fixed on her face, as if it had been thrown there and stuck, like not quite cooked spaghetti against the wall. I was like, excuse me? Let's see if I had any others that I had specifically. Oh yeah, there was like, she was like closed her eyes at one point and like she was going to sleep, and it was like, when the shop shutters come down again, I welcome the blackness like a friend. Her face scrunched up like a paper bag, you know? And I'm just like, okay, so there was metaphors all the time, like so much the overuse of metaphors. So that was kind of in part of the writing as well. And there was also definitely like added in bits that were so random. So like she was at one point talking at the beginning and was like the character when she's just been like kidnapped and in this situation, and how she kind of was starting to laugh. And she was like, I laugh when I'm nervous. Like that time I got held at gunpoint at a bank robbery. And it was just like, it was an added in scene that made no added sense and was just thrown in there. And it was like, what? That's so random. I don't think it was very well written. It is also split into two perspectives between our main girl character and a cop, the cop who is investigating the disappearance. And I did like that to an extent, because you got to see how her family were reacting and what was going on behind, like outside, when it's from her perspective. Obviously you are stuck in this apartment, but it got to the point where it became so much about the cop's life as well that felt unnecessary. And basically she's having a bit of a marital issue with her husband because she's working all the time. They have 2 kids and she's like, you know, I have to work all the time. I need to be on call. We're living in London, it's expensive, I want to move up in the ranks. And it did feel, which is something my older sister pointed out, it did feel a bit misogynistic. The author was really trying to hone the point in that she was wrong for wanting to have a career, and that like everyone in her life was being like, you've made your choice to be a mum, you know, you shouldn't have that. And he was able to go to work and do all this because he had set hours, but her wanting to pursue this career was wrong because she was a woman. And I do think I got those vibes from that as well. And there were some other slight bits where I felt like it was weirdly misogynistic, in that later on, after stuff has happened, the cop is interviewing this guy, or she's going to meet him, and he flusters her. She like wants to she thinks about dressing up for him, or she like has to resist doing her makeup, and then she like catches herself. And I'm like, that doesn't feel very professional. Like, why is this professional woman getting flustered by someone who is an alleged murderer and kidnapper at this point? Not alleged murderer for the main character, maybe not. I won't say spoilers for it. So like there was definitely like hints of that. So, and also sometimes what cops chapters really felt tedious because it was adding in so much information that did not add to the overall story and wasn't necessary. I will say there was, halfway through this book, there is a pretty big twist that I genuinely had no idea coming, because I'm pretty sometimes good at guessing ends and I like to try and, you know, guess as I'm going along and figure things out. And I did not at all. Like, it really threw me for a loop. And I think that was well done. And I liked that. And that after that point, it really got me going, and I really wanted to read more and see where it was going to go, because I was like, what the hell is going on now? I do think that was quite good. The wrap up of this story, it was fine. It was average, it was fine, but I do think the way that it wrapped up was too easy, and that there definitely would have been consequences after the fact. Like, I don't think the way that it ended would have been the end of the story. I think other characters would have done stuff based on how they acted in this book, based on how the ending went, if that makes sense. I do think it was a bit gory, but in a shock value way, and a way that didn't really add much. Like, for instance, our main girl character, she's a vegetarian, and he is like, you're going to eat meat because I'm going to make you eat meat, and so he makes her to eat meat, and it's quite graphic the way that it describes it, which I'm a vegetarian, so I did not like in general, but it also describes her throwing up a lot. But instead of just being like, you know, I throw up again, it describes it, which is nasty. There was a bit with a candle, which was gross. And there's also a bit where he is talking to her. Dominic is the main guy. His name is, he's the kidnapper. And he's talking to her and mentions her being barren. And I do not remember her ever saying in this book that she was barren. She mentions once having an abortion, but she doesn't actually ever mention being barren. So I don't know where he got that from. And like, it was then never addressed. Overall, I think there are probably better Christmas thrillers out there, if I'm honest with you. This was fine. And it wasn't a different read from all the other Christmas books that I've kind of read before. So it was kind of that very different kind of vibe. But it was, yeah, a bit poorly written, very shock value-y, kind of grotesque stuff just kind of thrown out there. I would definitely read trigger warnings if you were potentially going to read this, because I'm not particularly triggered by many things. I will say the eating the meat thing grossed me out because it went into a bit of detail, and that's probably the only trigger that I really have that I really don't like, is descriptions of eating meat, because you don't really expect it to be sometimes as like visceral as it was in this book. But yeah, I think it was, like I said, I gave it a 2-star. It was an easy read, it was quick, but it was a bit poorly written. It was 400 pages. It definitely could have had a lot of that chopped off. Like I said, so much of this cop stuff could have been chopped down, made her less of like trying to give herself this own story and character, and instead of just made her a device so that we could have got an outside look of what was going on, her meeting the family, seeing the family, kind of picking those pieces. But it had just so much to do with her own life that you could have probably easily chopped at least 50 pages off, just taken that out, probably more than that. I will say I was surprised by the twist in the middle. Did not see that coming, and I thought it added an interesting element to what the book, you thought the book's going to be, because it ended up becoming something that I did not think, like I was not what I thought it was going to be. Ending execution, I do not think would have ended as easily or as finally as this book was. There definitely would have been, in my mind, consequences after the end of this story. So yeah, that's my thoughts for this book. So yes, they are the 4 things that I actually read in December. Like I mentioned, I did finish off a couple of manga, but they will be in my manga reading vlog. And I just didn't read as much as I wanted to in December, if I'm honest. I ended up working a lot more, because I had some time, and obviously it's the Christmas rush. I work in a supermarket, so it was quite a busy period. I got slightly sick, as I think we all did over Christmas, and then yeah, I was at home for about a week for Christmas, and so I just chilled. I just played video games, watched things, hung out with my family, and so yeah, I did not read as much. I read 4 things, and I'm pretty happy with that. That is all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you again hopefully soon.